Hi Maker, I'm Angel with fleecefun.com, and today I'm going to show you everything you need to know to make a rag quilt. We're going to go over sizing, we're going to go over washing, we're going to go over cutting, we're going to go over putting together all the things you need to know to put together an awesome rag quilt. And this is a perfect beginner quilt. So if you've never done quilting before, stay tuned. I'm going to walk you through it. This is the perfect beginner quilt. Please note that you can make different combinations of fabric and batting. You can make the blanket without minky and just use flannel, which is a lot more traditional. You will need flannel. This is the fabric that frays the best and the softest. Minky, this is optional. Batting, rack and shears, optional, but I really recommend them. Rotary cutter, ruler, and mat. Thread, walking foot, which is important for heavier blankets. And of course, sewing essentials, scissors, pins, that sort of thing. Now, I have a handy guide that will walk you through exactly the amounts of fabric that you're going to need to make a throw. So there's a link near this video, find the link and you'll be able to get a hold of that handy dandy guide to show you the exact amounts of things that you're going to need. Because what we're going to talk about right now is actually how the different block sizes will change the amount of fabric that you'll need. So let's talk about block sizes. How to make a rag quilt, easy beginner's guide. Step 1, design your quilt. So the first thing we need to do is design your quilt, and part of designing the quilt is deciding what block size you are going to use in your quilt. Typically it's 12, 10, 9, or 6 inches. Now, how you want your quilt to look is going to change with the size of block. The bigger the block in the quilt, the less ragging there's going to be on the quilt. The smaller the block, the more ragging, so you can get more of that wonderful texture. Now, what's funny about this is that because if you use a smaller block, you actually need more fabric because you're going to be ragging more of that fabric because there's going to be more ragging on the quilt. I'm going to walk you through it. Before you even begin cutting out fabric or even buy fabric, you need to decide on which block size you want your quilt to be. The traditional block sizes are 12 inch, 10 inch, 9 inch, and 6 inch. Each size has its advantages and disadvantages. The larger the block, the less fabric and the less ragging there is. The smaller the block, the more ragging. While more ragging gives it a beautiful shabby chic look, it also eats a lot more fabric. So two quilts that are the same size but one has a larger block and one has a smaller, the quilt with the smaller blocks will require more fabric. You need to decide on the size of ragging. I like 3/4 of an inch, about 2 centimeters. But if you want less, you can make it 1/2 inch. Designing your quilt is deciding how you want your block sandwich to go. So for example, in the example quilt I made, it has a minky back, then it has some batting, then it has 2 layers of flannel. And this is a really heavy quilt. So if your machine isn't a really strong machine, you're not going to want to make this size. You're going to want to make a different kind. I'm going to show you the different kinds of sandwiches you can make from your blocks. There are different combinations you can use to make the rag quilt warmer, softer, or heavier. If this is your absolute first time making a rag quilt, I recommend the flannel, batting, flannel combination, as this is the easiest and lightest to sew. Just so you know, I like to add a layer of flannel to the block as it makes the ragging more full. You can make a block slimmer or lighter by not having this layer. Just bear in mind that the ragging won't look as full as the example quilts. If you choose to use minky, you really want to use a walking foot. It will make the process much less frustrating. If you plan on sewing with minky, a walking foot is a worthy investment. Okay, so this video is actually sponsored by myself. I am tired of writing for the algorithm. I am tired of AI scraping my content. And so it's gotten to the point where I want to write for people, not machines. And that is why I have the Maker Studio. The Maker Studio is now where I'm putting all my energy. That is where all my fresh content is, and exclusive patterns, as well as fun treats. And you can also learn new skills in that, courtesy of the Dangerous Women Sew Society. All kinds of amazing things are going on in the Maker Studio, and I would love for you to join me there. For the price of a single pattern, you can have access to everything that I have to offer for a month. Come check it out, and maybe even make a few new sewing friends along the way. Now, here is one of the great things about a rag quilt is that you don't want to pre-wash anything. Previously, I had suggested that you pre-wash it. I'm actually changed my mind on that one. You don't want to pre-wash any of your fabric, and here is why. Because the first time you go and you wash your quilt, that is when a lot of the great ragging occurs. And if you wash it beforehand, it actually tightens up those fibers and it doesn't make it rag as nicely. So you need to hold off on washing your flannel until we actually wash the quilt when we're ready to rag it. No need to wash the fabric, you can just get going. Let's cut out the squares to the rag quilt. Start by cutting a strip the size of your chosen block across the width of the fabric. Next, turn the strip. Make sure you trim off the selvage, it won't fray. Cut the strip in the block size you need. Continue until you've cut out all the blocks you need. Now, if you are working with minky, I've worked with this block already, and you can see there's pieces coming off of it. Minky is messy. You need to have a lint roller handy. It doesn't hurt to have a little vacuum nearby also. And it doesn't also hurt to take the blocks that you've just cut outside and just shake them and get off all of that fuzz. And even then, you're still going to be covered. You might want to wear an apron while you're working with minky. Now, if you've never worked with minky before, I'm going to suggest actually it might be easier just to do flannel on the back and save the minky back for your second quilt. Cut the minky squares in a similar fashion. They are the same size as the flannel squares. Finally, cut the batting squares. The length of the ragging will determine the size of the batting in the center. So, for example, if you have a 6-inch square, I would subtract the ragging or the seam allowance of 0.75 times 2, so the interior batting square would be 4.5 inches in size. Step 3. Prep the quilt blocks for sewing. Now, something when you're making the quilt, especially your sandwiches, is you need to pay attention to a couple of things. If you're working with minky, you need to pay attention to the nap of the fabric, and that is like how the fabric lays. You can kind of, when you push it, you can see how it can go dark. That's the nap of the fabric. And ideally, you want it all going in one direction. Ideally, if it's not perfect, it's okay. I won't tell anyone. Now, if you are working with fabrics that are directional, you need to make sure that they're all going in the same direction. Same for the back. Actually strongly recommend for the back, keep it all the same color to help with, because trying to design it for the front and the back is kind of a nightmare, and you can map it out. It is possible to do, but if you're a beginner, make your life a little easier. Make the back solid, keep all the pretty patterns in the front, but also make sure the patterns are going in the same direction. Pay attention to it, okay? So when you begin to build your quilt block, if you're using minky in it, it's a good idea to check the nap and have it all going in the same direction. The minky, or bottom of the block, the right side should face down on the work surface, the wrong side facing up at you. Next, place the batting in the center of the block. Next, add a layer of plain flannel to make the ragging thicker on the quilt. Finally, place the top of your block on your quilt sandwich with the fabric facing right side out, or up at you. Pin or safety pin your block into place. Repeat this process for all of your blocks. Hey, I'm going to take a minute and ask you to give me a thumbs up for my hard work here. I work hard to bring you these videos. It's me filming, shooting, and editing. I would really appreciate it. Step 4. Sew the quilt blocks. If sewing blocks that are 6 inches, you only need to sew one diagonal line across the block to finish it. Blocks bigger than 6 inches need to be sewn together using an X from corner to corner. You can draw the X on each block using a ruler and a washable pen to help keep your line straight. So, any blocks that are bigger than this one, anything bigger than a 6-inch, you need to do the X across. 6-inch, you can get away with just doing one seam across it. Now, I'm going to show you a quick little trick that a lot of quilters use called chain sewing to sew these bad boys together very quickly. When sewing all the blocks together, you can use an old quilter's trick, chain sewing. Basically, you don't worry about locking the stitch. You just continue to sew through all the blocks, beating one right after the other. When finished, simply snip the thread between them apart. No need to start and stop on each block. Unlike most quilting, rag quilts have a lot of wiggle room. If you sew it and it's not perfectly squared up through all the layers, it's fine. If it's really off, like by an inch or so and the batting isn't centered, then there's a problem and you need to unpick your block and sew it again.
Step 5. Sew the quilt blocks into rows.
Take them and make them into rows. Something I like to do is I like to use washi tape and mark it on my sewing machine since I'm using a fatter seam allowance than I'm used to usually sewing with, so I don't really know the line very well, so I just mark it with washi tape. And it also helps when you're sewing your rows together. The longer rows, if you mark it all the way across your table, helps it make it a lot easier to line up.
We'll start with rows and build the blanket from there. Lay out your blocks in the order that you want the row to go. If using minky, double check that the nap is the right direction and that the diagonal stitch is in the right direction also. With the bottoms of the block touching, sew along the right side using a 3/4 inch seam allowance. Since a 3/4 inch seam allowance isn't a common one I sew with, I like to mark it with some washi tape on my machine to make it easier to see while I'm sewing the quilt blocks. Add the blocks in the desired pattern you want. When sewing the blocks together, lock the seams. Continue to add the blocks to the row on the right side until you've added all the blocks in a row. For this blanket, I use 9 blocks in a row. Continue to make all the rows for your cozy blanket. Sew each row of the blocks together. Step 6. Sew all the rows together.
All right, now that you've got all those rows sewed together, it's time to take the rows and sew them together to start to form your blanket. Now, something you need to pay attention while you're sewing this, especially if you are doing very thick blocks like this with a minky on it, is that as you sew, the blanket gets heavier. You want to make sure that it's not tugging on the needle. So you need to make sure that you're lifting it up, it's sitting on the table, and it's not pulling on the needle as you're feeding it through. And it's kind of a trick the bigger the blanket gets. But pay attention to that. You don't want to break the needle, you don't want to hurt your sewing machine. So make sure that that weight, you're feeding it through and you're not having it pull on the machinery.
Let's build this blanket. Take 2 of your rows with the bottoms of the rows touching, sew together using a 1/4 inch seam allowance. But since we're learning quilting, I need to teach you an important trick of lining up the blocks at the corner.
All right, now that we're taking those rows and sewing them together, we need to nest the seams. It's an old quilter's trick. It helps just line things up really nice. I'm going to show you how to do it. It makes it easier to sew across, especially the very thick seams if you're using minky on the back. You need to take your time, go slow, and lengthen your stitch if you're sewing a thicker quilt. I'm going to show you how to do that.
You nest the seams. This is a way of making the blocks line up beautifully. To nest the seams, fold the seam of the top block over so it's easier to sew over. Then you fold the bottom seam allowance over so it's going the opposite direction. This makes it easy to line up right at the seams of each block. I recommend pinning it at the seam all along the row. Continue to add rows to the blanket as shown, nesting the seams. At this point, be mindful that as you add rows, it adds weight to the quilt. Don't let it tug on the needle while feeding it through your sewing machine. Hey, it's turned into a blanket. Step 7, finishing the outer edges to a rag quilt.
Okay, we've got the quilt all sewn together and it is beautiful, it is looking great, but now we need to finish the edges. There are a couple of different ways I'm going to show you. There's like a very easy way and then there's a little more complicated way depending on how good you're feeling about making your blanket. The easiest way is to just sew around your blanket with that seam allowance, okay? Whatever seam allowance you decided for your ragging, you sew that around the edge of your blanket and then you just rag the edge of the blanket and that's it and it's done. Easy, easy, okay? Another way is that you can actually bind the blanket, and I do have a tutorial on how to bind things with minky. That's all you have to do. One is a little more advanced. Binding with minky is a little more advanced. I will tell you, especially when I'm making a heavier blanket, I like binding it just because it gives that nice more weighted edge to it. Whereas when you just rag the edge, it actually makes the edge lighter. And when I make blankets, I tend to like the edges a little more heavy because I feel like it lays on you better. That is a personal preference of mine. You do you. You do how you want to finish this blanket. So easiest way, just rag the ends, and I've done it that way, or you can finish it with minky and binding it that way.
Step 8, snip the seams to the rag quilt.
it is finally time to start the ragging process. And this is going to take a minute. Now, I will tell you something that I really strongly recommend are these spring-loaded shears that are specifically for ragging. They are ragging shears. They will make your life easier. Even with the spring-loaded shears, depending on how big your blanket and what size of block you decided to use, it can be a very long process. It's called turn on a movie and snip away, and it's going to take a little time. Now, the finer the snipping, the better the ragging. I prefer my chunks to be about 1/4 inch apart. That's a personal preference. They can be more, but it won't rag as nicely, especially with the flannel. So you need to take that into account when you do that. Also bear in mind that when you're ragging, what you cut from the minky is that's it. Like, minky doesn't unravel like the flannel does, and so whatever it is left at is where it's going to stay. It's going to stay that thick and chunky. So when I do a minky back especially, I tend to try and snip it a little finer if I can help it. Now, I will tell you, even with my best effort, sometimes I miss something before I wash it. Just go back and snip it and it'll be okay. It'll kind of blend. But you really want to take your time and just kind of go over the quilt. Try to be methodical if you can. Go row by row and start snipping. Be very careful not to snip through your seams. Okay, and this is something you just really need to do in piecemeal. There's no way you're going to do this in one sitting. You really need to just put it down, go do something else, pick it back up, and do it again. Take your time.
Step 9. Wash the rag quilt.
All right, now that you've done all of this cutting, it is time to wash it. Now, some people will tell you that it has to have an agitator in it, the washer, like the old washers, you know, the uprights, they have the agitator column in the center. I've done it without it. My recommendation is put a couple towels in there with it to help with the agitation. I've done it in my energy efficient washer that doesn't have the center agitator, and it's worked just fine. So make sure you put in some old towels with it and put it in there. Now, also make sure no liquid fabric softener, okay? Doesn't matter if it's minky or not. Liquid fabric softener, while it does help make things nice and soft, it also makes things gummy. And when you're trying to get something to unravel and to be this rough, ragged edge, you really need to not put any fabric softener in there so it doesn't stick in the fibers and it'll make it clumpy. Okay, so no fabric softener. You can use a dryer sheet if you really have to have something, if it's super staticky where you are, but no liquid fabric softener, okay? I'm trying to help you out.
Thank you so much for watching. Please be sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more awesome videos just like this one.
And that's it. You have this great quilt. It looks great. It feels so good. It's nice and warm. It has this fun texture to it. It is just one of those wonderful things that is perfect for watching on a cold winter's night and, you know, watching movies and hanging out with friends and that sort of thing.